Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for joining us for this conversation tonight, if it's night, evening where you are, to talk about regional languages in Europe and how some countries manage them. We can maybe begin by introducing ourselves,
Yeah,
if you
that
want to
sounds
introduce yourself.
Okay, so thank you again for joining us. My name is Cecilia Gialdini, and I'm a PhD researcher at Ulster University. And my research focuses on linguistic justice and the evaluation of language policies. I'm from Italy also, if that is relevant.
It is going to be relevant for
Yeah.
the talk. And my name is Marc Olivier Loiseau. I'm also a PhD researcher at Ulster University, and I'm working on how language is stored in the mind and in the brain, really, and how it is structured and how this structure changes over time. But we're not talking about any of this tonight. We're going to talk about more what you do than what I do.
Yeah.
So the idea was that according to the European Union, there are about 60 languages in Europe for 28 countries. So I'm including the UK in those 28 countries.
Yes, let's
that
include
was
them.
that was in a report that was done when the UK was still part of the EU. So that has to be a bit problematic in some places. We suppose that it means that we have twice as many languages as we have countries. So the idea really was to try to look and see how those countries deal with those languages. Maybe we can start by a tiny bit of background on why do we have so many languages in Europe. Very, very roughly speaking, almost all European languages come from the same language at first, way back in a long time ago, about 8,000 years ago, Indo-European, if some of you are familiar with that name. And basically then the group split into two and then into two again in different places. And then the groups would not communicate anymore for thousands of years. And you end up with English, Russian, French,
Italian,
all of them. And that means that there are some languages that became politically stronger than others. And the others are the regional languages. Those are the ones we like to focus on tonight. So really the question is, how do countries deal with multilingual regions? And we're going to spend time on two case studies. I'm going to give you some background on the situation in France, the legal framework of France and regional languages, and then I will focus on the Gascony region at the southwest, and you will talk about Südtirol.
Yeah, instead we'll go on a journey to the Dolomites, and I will bring you to South Tyrol in Italy, where, as some of you will be familiar with, there's a German and Latin-speaking minority. So we will see how Italy deals with regional languages as well. Okay. So Mark has provided you with a very brief but interesting background on why we have so many languages in Europe. I will try to focus more on where are the problems, because of course languages are an enrichment for in the fact that the continent is multilingual is actually an enrichment for Europe itself. So where is the problem? Why are we talking about management of multilingualism? The thing is that every state has to make a choice in the field of language, and they cannot really refrain from making any choices, because already choosing one official language instead of another is already a language choice, and so it gives birth to a linguistic policy. Just to give you a very brief overview, I will share my screen now. Okay, so we mainly identify four different framework of interaction between the state and this linguistic minorities or linguistic groups. So the first one is the repressive or nationalist state. As you can clearly imagine from the name, it is the worst case scenario. In these cases, the state are driven by a very strong nationalistic spirits, and they think that the linguistic minorities should be assimilated. That is because the mere existence of someone that speaks a different language jeopardizes the integrity of the national spirit. So this can go from discriminations to explicit xenophobia to even ethnic cleansing at the harshest level. So that's the thing that we should avoid. And we move forward to a greater level of inclusion that is constituted by the agnostic or liberal state. It is the kind of framework that is most widespread at the moment. It calls for a colorblind constitution, so civil rights, citizenship rights are granted on not on the basis of ethnicity. And on paper, there is no discrimination for linguistic matters. And you would say, well, that's good. Not really, because there's still a creeping racism and underlying discrimination in these cases. It's not a full inclusion yet. Then we move forward to the promotional state. And in these cases, there's a higher level of inclusion. Not only the different languages are recognizing their essence, but the state actually makes some affirmative actions in their promotion. So there might be targeted policies to language revitalization, or even just to grant some liberties to this group. And the last one is the multinational state. This, of course, is the highest level of inclusion that we can get. And in this case, there is not really any difference between the national majority, the majority and the minority. All citizens are seen as the same, and usually languages are spoken in the same way, and they are equivalent before the law. Okay. There are some. Here are I just put some motivations, some of the basic reasons why we should consider language policies and why we should go towards a more inclusive approach. The first one is an ethical consideration. So we are making a more philosophical speech. We say that it's a moral duty to protect individuals that speak a different language. The second one, it's slightly related to the former, but it's more based on paper, on legal documents. So we must protect these different languages because international or domestic laws oblige us to do so. The third one is the one that probably Mark would appreciate the most. So we have to preserve them because they preserve the richness of the linguistic environment. As Mark said at the beginning, like languages are an important part of our cultural heritage. So that's a reason for protecting them as they are. There's also a political consideration. So if you want to prevent conflict and tensions, you might as well give some guarantees to the different linguistic groups. And the final one, last but not least, it might be more convenient to give some, to have language policies that are more inclusive in a trade-off between the benefits and the costs of creating that policies. So,
yeah, I think we obviously both share the view that a language is something precious that we have to save somehow.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that bit of theory here that is going to be relevant for the more practicalities maybe. So we'll begin with France. I will begin with France really, and then we'll move on to Italy. In order to understand the situation of France now, we have to go back to history. You might not be familiar with the number of regional languages that we have in France.
How many?
according to the government website, the Ministry for Culture, there are about 82 languages of France. 82 and about 50 overseas. So France used to have a lot of colonies, and it kept some islands here and there and some territories here and there on other continents. So 82 englobes the totality of languages that are spoken on the French territory nowadays. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to talk about that aspect of overseas regional languages because the issue is slightly different. And I will focus on what's spoken at home, really, on the continent.
And I thought that in France you spoke only French.
Well, we do. The situation is a bit more nuanced than that. So we have to go back in time to understand. 2,000 years ago, there are some tribes that speak some Celtic languages, just like, Irish, Welsh, Breton, if you're familiar with it, those languages. And then the Romans invaded the territory with Latin. They imposed the Latin language. Then they went back home 500 years after with the fall of the Roman Empire. But when they occupied the territory, of course, they gave their Latin language. And then they go back to Rome and they leave the territory as it is. So Celtic tribes that speak Latin. And then some evolution happens. I said at the beginning that when you split up two groups, eventually the language will evolve in different directions. This is exactly what happens. And we end up with several languages in France that descend from Latin directly, but aren't considered as Latin anymore. We know that from the 9th century, approximately, it's not Latin that's spoken anymore. It's different languages. We know that because the church had to do sermons in another language, and they actually said use the original language, but they didn't call it original language
because people didn't understand Mass.
They would go to church and they wouldn't understand what was said at church anymore. So that was seen as problematic. Maybe I have a map that shows what the situation is in France, and I will show you. Is it sharing? Perfect. What I say when I said that there were different languages that descend from Latin. So in purplish in the north, you have the langues d'oil, which are what will become French eventually. And you see in the south, the situation is slightly different. We call them the Languedoc or Occitan languages, and Franco-Provençal in the east. So you see that the situation is mixed, sort of. There was the problem of Latin that was tackled by the church and then by the king during the 16th century, because Paris became the capital, and that's where the king lived. Then the king decided to impose French as the language of the law for the whole territory. And this is really the moment when French becomes the language of France, when it's actually in the law. So that's in 1939. Oh. Sorry, 1539, can't read numbers. From 1539, that French really becomes the language of the French state. A couple of centuries later, we have the French Revolution in 1789. That's quite famous. And there was
familiar with that.
There was sort of an issue. They really wanted to create a new state that was free but united. There was a fear that regions would just drift apart and not be united anymore. I think it's the first French sociolinguistic study that was carried at the time, showed that so there was a bishop that traveled around France with a questionnaire, and then he came back to Paris and he showed the result of his report, which said that about a fifth of the population was proficient in France, in French on the French territory.
1/5.
Only 1/5 of the French people spoke French, and that was seen as something very alarming. In this report, interestingly enough, he talks about the language, which is French, and he doesn't say that people speak French, he says that some people speak the language, and the other languages, he qualifies them as patois. So patois is a term that's quite famous in linguistics, especially in French linguistics. Literally means any language that's not the language.
Okay.
And I think that patois comes from the word pat, which means paws, like animals'
The cat's
arms,
paws? Okay.
for instance, because people could not speak a proper tongue, so they had to use their hands because the language itself was not sufficient.
Okay.
This is why what's called patois, I believe. That's what I understand from the etymology. So it shows what consideration they had towards other regional languages. They didn't think they were languages. They were just something that was irrelevant and basically stupid.
Okay, fair enough.
So we can basically say that from the French Revolution on, France has done everything possible in order to get rid of those patois slash regional languages, and succeeded quite well. The whole 19th century is just imposing French for the sake of unity. And apparently it wasn't working enough, because by the end of the 19th century, in 1881 precisely, they decided to establish a series of laws for education. And those laws said that every child should go to school until the age of 13.
Okay.
And obviously, the language of school had to be French. And this is the thing you want to do, right? If you want to get rid of a language, you go towards the young generation, because they are the one who are learning the language from their parents. But if you make the language from the parents unavailable, and if you traumatize them at school, then they will obviously not speak their original language anymore.
So they basically used the schooling system as a tool to create national unity through the language.
Definitely, because, and of course, education was free and compulsory. So they had to go to school and speak French. From that moment on, everybody speaks. So that law entered the legislation in 1881, and then you maybe give it 10, 20 years. So from the early 20th century, everybody spoke French in France, from the younger generation, right? It was a real tool for linguistic unification and suppression. There was something quite terrible that was used at school in France, but we know that it wasn't just in France, in other countries as well, maybe in Italy, although I'm not quite sure. The Sambal Punishment, which was basically, if a pupil was heard talking in his or her original language, or the language that they would speak at home, which was not French, then they would either be forced to stay after school for chores, or they would be beaten up by the teacher, or they would be given an item that they would have to carry all day long. And one of those items was, for instance, cow poop.
Oh,
so they were
disgusting.
basically given poop from the moment they were heard speaking a different language, and they would have to carry that cow poop everywhere with them all day long.
Okay, that's very discouraging.
It is humiliation, right?
Yes.
Well, let's call it. It is humiliation, and that traumatized generations of pupils.
I believe so. I mean, I would be traumatized as well.
Yeah, and so there are people who say that this was still happening in former colonies quite late into the 20th century, so not so long ago. But on the continent in France, that situation lasts until at least the mid 20th century, if not later. So that's not very long ago. We can agree on that. And so that's it for the history of France, really.
Did languages manage to survive then?
Barely. I think that towards the second part of the 20th century, people realized that in the regional languages were dying, and they started seeing this as something dangerous, and languages were seen as something precious. Unfortunately, only by a minority of people.
I see.
But those 82 languages are still alive, although greatly endangered. So the situation nowadays is not it's not very happy, I'm afraid. Let's go to 1992. In 1992, the Council of Europe established the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages that you're familiar with.
Yes.
And basically that charter was signed by almost every country in Europe. And so it was Europe, but not just the EU, because I know that Turkey was included, although they refused to sign it.
Yeah, because it's the Council of Europe, which is a bigger body in respect of the European Union. Some people, I'm just pointing that out because I don't know if anyone, like if everyone is familiar with the distinction, but yeah.
So it's the EU plus what's around, sort of?
It's two different bodies,
right.
But yeah. So Turkey as well was included, just to.
And they refused to sign it.
There you go.
So did Monaco and France. France refused to sign it. It refused to sign it because it would give. It's a bit hard to explain why. France didn't want to promote regional languages, as simple as that. The same year, in 1992, France amended the constitution, and the second article of the constitution then said the language of the republic is French.
There you go. Just said it.
And eventually, France decided to sign the charter from the Council of Europe in 1999, so 7 years later. But of course, when they signed it, they said, well, we can sign it, but we can't do anything about it because in the constitution, it says that the language of the republic is French.
Oh.
So that charter is anti-constitutional.
So they signed it just as a political act, but they never had any intention of implementing it.
It was never ratified.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's not good.
So I think that from that moment on, regional languages fell into some kind of limbo. So it fell into limbo in the legislation, but for some reason, people became much aware that regional languages had to be saved and were greatly endangered. And in 2008, eventually, the constitution is amended and regional languages are recognized at last.
Yay.
They are recognized as cultural heritage.
Yeah, sounds fair.
But it didn't change anything. They were just recognized as part of the cultural heritage. And then some politicians were like, so we can actually use that to implement regional languages here and there in public services. And the government says, no, we're just recognizing that they exist.
So we are one step behind. They didn't even recognize their existence. So this changed in 2008. So
2008, very recently. It was, it would be like saying Camembert is part of the cultural heritage. Would it give any rights to Camembert? No, it wouldn't. Very same thing that happened to regional languages.
Okay.
So they exist somewhere.
But they don't act on, they didn't do anything about them.
No, they didn't. But that led to some questioning from politicians. In some private schools, there was this will to save regional languages. So bilingual schools, private schools are starting to pop up here and there. But among the politicians, it was seen as something dangerous for some of them. One said that anti-Republican, there were anti-Republican schools because they were teaching a different language than French, and that would eventually lead to identity divide, which you will tell us for Italy is not the case at all. And we can even cite Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is at the head of the Communist Party and is quite famous in France, and you might know of him because he ran for president several times, who qualified those schools, bilingual schools, as sects, basically. And
sects.
So this is what the French government think about bilingualism in schools, which is a bit different from what the reality is. Thankfully, there are some politicians like Paul Molac, we can cite him, who speak up and say that no, the teaching French only is not a good thing, and plurilingualism does not go against teaching French at school. Actually, quite the contrary. So for the past 20 years, there has been a boom in implementing bilingual schools here and there, There aren't that many. Where I'm from, there aren't any, but because where I'm from,
where French was born, so
exactly. So
yeah.
My original language is French, so of course there wouldn't be any bilingual French in French school. It wouldn't make sense. And so not so long ago, in 2018, the French government changed education. So the equivalent of the PGCE in France became available in 8 regional languages, which was quite good. It's a very competitive exam in France. So that created new opportunities to learn regional languages at school. And this is when I can use the example of Gascogne to shed light on how this actually works. If we can share the map again,
Yes,
then we can see where Gascogne is. It's
there it is.
at the bottom left, so in geography that's southwest. We see Gascogne here in
Next to the Basque.
next to the Basque. Well, the 2 words are related, actually. Gascogne, Basque, Basque. You can hear it a bit. Basically, Gascon is the regional language of that region here, which is quite big. So if you know your French geography, it goes from Bordeaux up until the Spanish border, and it takes the Pyrenees. It's a Romance language, so just like French and Italian. It is similar to Occitan, but I'm not going to talk about whether they are 2 different languages or not.
That's material for another talk, I guess.
Definitely. What is interesting is that you can barely see it on the map, but Gascon is also spoken in parts of Spain. And so I said that the only language that was recognized in France was French.
Yes.
And you see that Gascon is sort of spoken in Spain, and it is actually the 3rd official language of Catalonia.
Is it?
It is. So Catalonia is doing more for Gascon than France is, although more people speak Gascon in France than in Catalonia, which is quite ironic, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's quite impressive.
So it is an endangered language, says the UNESCO. There are about 60,000 speakers. No, that's can't read numbers. 6,000 speakers.
Okay.
6,000 speakers of Gascon. If we want to compare that with Irish, according to the 2016 Irish census, 74,000 people declared speaking Irish daily.
Okay.
So you see, Gascon is almost nothing with 6,000 speakers.
Yeah.
We can, however, have a bit of hope because the younger generation is starting to learn it in some schools. There are what we call Escola Carandreta, which are schools, bilingual schools, Gascon and French. There are about less than 20 schools for the whole region, which is not that much. So we might think that there is hope. However, when we look at numbers, in 2002, they were recruiting 17 people to teach Gascon in those schools.
Okay.
So that's about 20 years ago. And this year, only 4 new teachers.
4?
For the whole region to teach Gascon, which is, it's going downhill, basically. If you want to compare with English teachers, for English, it's 797.
I didn't want to compare.
So you see that France is, and we could compare with, Portuguese, Mandarin Chinese, German, which are much higher than any other regional language. So France puts a lot of effort into teaching foreign languages, but for regional languages, they don't do much. There is hope, however, and I'm going to end on this, and then I will let you speak about Italy. There is a bill that was sent to the Senate in 2020. Unfortunately, just before the pandemic, and because of the pandemic, it's been put on hold. That bill was written by Paul Molac. I've cited him earlier. So he wants to amend the constitution, and which would then say the language of France is French and other regional languages.
Okay.
So that would actually turn France as a monolingual state into a plurilingual state with 82 official languages, which would be probably quite a mess at first, but in any way, it would be a certain strength for the country, and hopefully that would lead to the
more recognitions as well.
Yeah, and the preservation of all those languages that are just dying here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, well, actually, it would be a right transition for Italian. You probably know that sentence from Umberto Eco, which is La lingua d'Europa la traduzione. The language of Europe is translation. And we could then put that for France. Hopefully, if that bill is amended and becomes a law, that's the language of France is translation, and that would be absolutely wonderful to have a very rich country with regional languages. But we're not there yet, and as I said, we're going downhill in France, and it's not the situation in Italy, is it?
No, it really isn't. I mean, you painted a very depressing picture. I'm sorry to like blurting that out, but that's true. And especially considering that, again, it's a European country, and we kind of like we are happy to say that we are democratic and inclusive, and we are actually not so much, apparently. But it's not the case for Italy, at least for a very specific part of Italy. So what I'm talking about today, like the topic of my segment of this talk, is South Tyrol. So I have to say that yes, Italy is in better shape than France, but
you have a lot of dialects and that are actually spoken.
Yes, well, that's another topic itself, because we have dialect, we have regional dialect, but they are not recognized by law, so they are not protected by law, and they are not spoken in the public life, or at least when interacting with the public administration. You wouldn't go in a tribunal and ask to speak Sicilian, for instance. But you only can speak Italian. There's an asymmetry in this sense, because Italian is spoken in, yes, as I said, in the public life of the country, while dialects are more in the private sector, so they're spoken at home. They are still pretty much alive. There are numerous initiatives to avoid them dying off, but they are not protected as much as regional languages in the sense of national minorities languages. So that's the difference. What I'm talking about today, in fact, is something that are, as I already said, there are the national historical minority languages, which is a quite peculiar and specific part of the languages that are spoken in Italy. So first of all, just to give you an idea of how the whole Italian system works, I'm going to share you again the PowerPoint. From a legal point of view, the Italian system is shaped like a sort of a reverse pyramid, I would say. So the first provisions that are protecting this different linguistic speaking group come from the international law, the convention that Mark quoted before, and as well as other international provisions. I'm not gonna get into the details because there are so many, but I'm happy to answer any questions later on if you want. And the second level, there's the Italian constitution. And in the constitution at Article 6, we clearly say that the Republic protects linguistic minorities. So this provision, this very brief wording, is the principle that then paves the way to a more and more recognitions on the local level. From the Italian Constitution, we go to an ordinary law that specifically targeted national historical minorities. They're not in general. It's not like in France that there was this proposition of putting the language of France is French and regional languages. In the Italian law, there are some languages that are protected. So this ordinary law established a set of idioms that granted protections.
And they actually give the name, so this language, and that language.
Exactly. They are, just to name a few, Albanian, Catalan, so Catalonia is always present.
Wait, why Catalan? Catalonia is quite far from Italy, isn't it?
Yeah, but you know, from also Albania it's not bordering like directly, but or another language is Greek, for instance. That comes from historical reasons, because Italy was under domination of Spanish, Greece, and there was Magna Grecia at some point. So the ratio, the motivation for this, for the choice of these specific idioms is historical, so to protect something that was historically spoken there.
But nobody on the Italian territory actually speaks Catalan or Greek.
They speak a bit of Catalan in Sardinia.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, and Greek, it's not really the Greek that you would speak in Athens now, but there is a mixture between the dialect of Calabria and Greek that it's called Grecanico, and that's still spoken.
Right.
Again, same as the dialect, not widespread. We will see later now, but it exists. So for these languages, the Italian law gives the possibility of being protected and to implement instruments to recognize them and to let people speak it freely. But actually, what really matters are the regional statutes and regional constitutions and regulations. That means that the protection of regional languages in Italy, it's pretty much asymmetrical. I just mentioned the Grecanico in Calabria, in the area. That doesn't have the same status and the same protection as French in Piedmont or Val d'Aosta, or German and Latin in South Tyrol. So it is a very diversified panorama. But today I want to focus on one of the most successful experiments, just to lift us up a bit from France that didn't really set a very positive example. I'm sorry about that, but yeah, it is. So that's
it's good. We have a good contrast here, and you're actually going to show us that in some cases, there is hope and it's actually working.
Yeah, the purpose is indeed to see two extremes. So South Tyrol is probably one of the most advanced system of recognition and protection of historical and linguistic minority. So it is studied all over the world. Actually, it's a model that has been tried. Like they have tried to export it, but it's very bound to the territory. So of course, it's not that easy to spread it. But without further ado, let's go deep into the case study. So for those who don't know what I'm talking about, actually, I've been ranting about South Tyrol for like 5 minutes, and maybe you didn't even know where it is. It's a region bordering with Austria, so in the very north of Italy. You probably know it because it's a very famous skiing resort. Like there are very famous skiing resort, and it's very environmentally friendly. So it's quite well known for other reasons as well. But yeah, this in map of Italy, you can see where it is located. And here in the second map, you will see that, well, the region itself, it's called South Tyrol and Trentino. So in Italian, Trentino, Alto Adige, Sud Tirol, because it's bureaucratically, it's two regions, the Trentino speaking Italian and South Tyrol speaking mainly German and Italian.
So they speak, that region has two languages that are completely different. We're not talking about two dialects that are from the same language. We're talking about two languages completely different, Italian and German.
Yeah, actually, it's even three. Because in, well, South Tyrol, it is said that there is a bilingual / trilingual area. German and Italian are spoken, they're distributed geographically in a bit of a different way, but they are spoken throughout the territory. And there's also Ladin, which is spoken only in two valleys, mainly. So, but that's also another language that is recognized and protected. So yeah, it's very.
And Ladin is an Italian dialect.
No, it's not. It's a different language itself. The German that is spoken is similar to the Tyrolean dialect that is spoken in Austria. And of course, being a bordering region, the reason why there's this diversified linguistic panorama is indeed lies in its history. The territory has seen mixed events. So at the beginning, it was part of the Habsburgic Empire. So it was part of what today is Austria. From there, the name South Tyrol. So it's the southern part of the Tyrol region in Austria. But then in 1919, it was annexed to the Reign of Italy. So it became part of Italy. And at the beginning, it wasn't really that much of an issue. But the real problem came out with the Second World War, and actually before, with Mussolini's dictatorship. Because with Mussolini, we kind of see what at the beginning I was saying as the repressive state regime, because in light of a strong national spirit, he tried to erase completely anything that had to do with German language and German identity in the region. That was prohibiting with the prohibition of speaking German in any possible public places, closing German schools, which, funny enough, they managed to survive. They were called the catacomb schools because they were like
underground schools.
Yeah, they were. The German people in South Tyrol really were resilient during the fascist regime, and they tried to maintain their identity and their language. That's also why it came up until today. So the Mussolini tried to pursue this project of Italianization of South Tyrol. So not only, as I said, prohibiting the language, but also in giving incentives to Italian-speaking people coming from different regions, such as Veneto, where Venice is. He was giving them incentives, like monetary incentives, to come and work in Bolzano, Bozen, to Italianize the region. As you see, like this is textbook repressive state. I think that a similar path can be seen in Catalonia with Franco, that it's pretty much, it was pretty much the same. So, but gladly after the war, something changed, and Italy decided to make a step forward, the minority, and it was granted autonomy. So with the first statute of autonomy, the region had a number of competences, so they could organize in a more egalitarian way, but that was not seen as enough. In fact, the ethnic tensions didn't stop. And in the 60s, we see a very critical moment in the region with even terrorist attacks and tensions and fear spreading all over. So the problem wasn't really solved by that first statute. That's why they decided, well, actually, the United Nations intervened and urged Italy and Austria to find a solution because the situation was simply unacceptable. And they did. A commission was formed and they established a second statute, which is the one that is in force today, that grants way more autonomy and way more competences to the region. So basically, South Tyrol was able to administrate themselves in the way that was more inclusive and better represented the different linguistic groups within itself. So just to, now I've explained a little bit about the history, so you have a clear picture of why there's a region where in Italy that speaks German. Actually, when I say to foreigners, they are very surprised because they think that Italian is monolingual, so we only speak Italian. But as I said before, it's actually a more complex panorama. And
yeah, I had no idea that German was spoken in Italy.
Yeah, it sounds bizarre, but it is, and actually it's, as I said, very well spoken and well protected. So what's happening today? Like, what is this region like in at the present moment? Why am I saying that it's such a successful experiment? So the second statute of autonomy states that German and Italian are equivalent before the law. So the two languages are absolutely at the same level. As I said before, South Tyrol has a bilingual/trilingual status. That is because German and Italian follow the personality principle. That means that it's the individual, the one who decides which language is the one that has to be used in the interactions. So if I am if I speak German and I go to a public office and I decide to speak German, they will have to reply me in German. Right. And that is true in the whole territory of the region. So from Meran to Bolzano to the valleys, you can speak either German or Italian.
Which is quite amazing when you think of it.
Yes, it is. Instead, the Ladin language that I mentioned before, since it is spoken only in two valleys, we say that it follows the territoriality principle. So it is recognized, but it has a slightly different status from these two major languages. So in the Ladin Valley, you can speak Ladin, but you wouldn't speak Ladin in other parts, in other cities. So how this bilingual system works? As I said, if I speak German, I can go to social housing or the hospital and just ask to speak in German. Same goes for Italian. You can basically interact in any area of the public administration and even the judicial system. So you can ask, I hope you would never incur in that, but if you would ever go to Bolzano and you have to go under trial, you can request Italian. I'm saying Italian because you speak a bit of Italian. You cannot ask for French, I'm sorry. But yeah, it's actually compulsory for public servants to have what it is called a patent of bilingualism. So the higher the level of in the public administration, the higher has to be your proficiency in both languages. So this is not true also only for public sector, but also for private companies that offer public services, such as public transportation, for instance. So if you want to buy a bus ticket and you are an Italian speaker, you can ask in the forms in Italian, and you can ask the person that is there to speak in Italian.
So they basically put anything that you need at your disposal for your language.
Yeah.
Provided it's one of the original languages from the region.
Exactly. The only exception is the schooling system, which is separated. So there's the German track from kindergarten to high school, and there's the Italian track, again, from kindergarten to high school. In both schooling system, you have to learn the other language as a second language, and you learn mainly in your first one. So again, if I am attending an Italian school, I would learn math in Italian, but I will have German as a second language.
Mm-hmm.
This has been a bit of a point to work towards too, because more and more people are asking for completely bilingual schools, not only because there are a lot of children from mixed couples, of course, so years gone by, and this model that it was at the beginning coexistence but separation is going towards a more inclusive system. So they are going towards a more bilingual system, but that's still not on the plate at the moment. But yeah, that's the picture of South Tyrol for what it concerns languages. There's also ethnic quota system, meaning that there has to be like public servant employed in the public sector have to be in a proportional number of the demographic composition of the population. So for each German, if the German-speaking population is a certain number, you have to have a proportional number of civil servants that have that language as a mother tongue.
Right.
Yep.
It's very brilliant what this region is doing, and what you were saying here, actually, we know that more than half of the world population is actually multilingual, and if this was the case everywhere in every single country, we wouldn't even have conversations like this, which would be quite brilliant.
Yeah.
And this, of course, what brings us together here is that we all have connections to Northern Ireland, right? Yes. And that maybe makes us want to talk about what the situation is in Northern Ireland. There are, let's say, three languages here, English, Irish, and Ulster Scots. And only English is the official language of Northern Ireland. So, of course, there are things that are put in place for the Irish language. There are many people learning Irish. There are 28 primary Irish medium schools in Northern Ireland, which is more than bilingual schools in the Gascogne region. So if you compare the two, you see that Northern Ireland is actually actively doing things to get people into speaking more Irish, despite some political divide. So we know, I know that there are people who joined this Zoom even tonight and might not be familiar with the situation in Northern Ireland. Some years ago, they tried to pass the Irish Language Act, which eventually led to more political divides that was not necessarily linked to languages anymore, but there's no need to going into too much detail here. That would be a whole different conversation. So the Irish Language Act is not in the actuality anymore, but there is in 2020 the new government signed the New Decade's New Approach Document, yes. And I can we can sum it up in three main ideas. The first one is to grant official status to Irish and Ulster Scots as well as English. The second is to develop and promote the use of regional languages, which is what the Charter of the Council of Europe wants to do as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And the third point is to allow the members of the Assembly to use Irish in the Assembly, provided that there are English translations as well. Which those three ideas, if they are finally put in place, would definitely reinforce Irish and Ulster Scots as regional languages and step up the game a bit with those languages.
Definitely, yeah. Unfortunately, it was 2000, like the New Decade, New Approach document was also like started, the process was started in 2020, same as with the French bill. So it seems like last year would have been an amazing year for regional languages, and yet it wasn't.
And it wasn't.
Yeah. So yeah, the effect of the pandemic are pretty clear also in this respect. So to sum up, what the purpose of this talk was to give you two very different examples. One that goes more towards the nationalistic framework. I wouldn't say it's again, considering the categories that we explored at the beginning, I wouldn't call it nationalistic in like as a whole, because as I said, that kind of model was mainly dictatorships behavior. So I mentioned Franco and Mussolini, but definitely like France stays a bit in between nationalist and agnostic kind of state. Whereas with South Tyrol, we go more towards a promotional state. I wouldn't like, again, the categories are not set in stone, and of course it's very difficult to find a country that fixed them perfectly. Maybe just again Mussolini's Italy during the fascist regime is a totally repressive kind of state. But yeah, what we wanted to do is just to provide you with two very different real life examples of how multilingualism is managed in Europe, and maybe find like some ideas and some food for thoughts for further development in this area as well with Irish and Ulster Scot.
And we would like actually to, so this is the end of our talk really, but it's not the end of the event. We had in mind that we would talk for about an hour and then hopefully have a sort of interaction with you, because we know that not everybody is in Northern Ireland here, and some of you are in Northern Ireland as well. So it might be interesting to so of course, when we designed this event, we had ideas that we would actually be in a room with an audience. That's of course not the case, but we can maybe try and recreate sort of an interactive half hour here.
So if you want to just comment on the talk or ask a question or even criticize us, it's okay. We can take it. Just drop any question or comment in the chat, or if you feel brave enough, you can switch on your microphone and talk directly, as you can choose whatever you want. We have already some comments here.
There is Paul, who's I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing names here. Paul, who is what's happening behind? Are we still here? Yeah, we are. Okay. Paul, who's saying that what the suppression of regional languages in 19th century France sounds like what's happening in Ireland after 1831. Yeah, I think it's a model that was used in loads of different countries, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. Again, I mentioned Catalonia as well, with Franco. That's suppressing the language is one of the main strategies. It's the most immediate way of suppressing people's identity. And of course, identity is strongly related to political beliefs as well, especially in divided countries. So of course, suppressing a language is a strong political act, and there's an underlying motivation of establishing a predominance of the majority over the minority, again in the light of this nationalist spirit. But it's, yeah.
And here we have examples from the 19th century, but it happened also quite late if we think about Louisiana, which is a French-speaking region in the US. And speaking French at school was not allowed, not so long ago, in the 50s and in the 60s.
Yeah,
so that's less than a century ago.
So yeah, there's someone that mentions the Croats. Yeah, actually the ordinary law also mentioned Croat as a regional language. Oh, I see that Ilaria is brave enough, and yeah.
Oh. I don't know if my microphone is actually working.
It is?
We can hear
Hi.
you.
It is. Hi. So I am from Sicily in Italy, and of course I not only speak Italian, but I speak Sicilian as well. And I'm a proud Sicilian speaker, because when I was in school, it was a reason for shame to speak Sicilian, and our language, we were taught by our own parents that we shouldn't speak Sicilian because it was something to be ashamed of, something that it was reserved to not educated people. So I would like to understand here, as a person who has a little bit of a background in linguistic, but not so much, where is the difference between a regional language and a dialect? Because I would like my language to be recognized. I would like to be recognized as a person who speaks two languages as mother tongue and not just Italian. So I'll leave you the floor. Thank you so much. That was super interesting to both of you.
Thank you, Ilaria. I think that's a question for you, really.
Yeah, and I'm afraid that the answer is going to be quite disappointing. But what's the difference between a dialect and a language? Well, sometimes a dialect, I mean, it's mostly political, right?
I was about to say.
Why is Gascon maybe considered as a dialect and Catalan considered as a language, for instance? Well, Catalonia is somehow independent and Gascon isn't, so that's the reason. When it comes to actual science of languages, we can sometimes say that sometimes it's a bit clear. For instance, if you we can so I'm not very familiar with Irish, but I'm aware that the Irish that is spoken in Ireland is different in some regions. So here it's clearly the same language, but with variations here and there. I think that the definition of what a dialect is depends from one linguist to another. The idea that a dialect is a subpart of a greater language is true, but then it's a bit hard to say. So what is higher, what is lower, what is a part, what is a subpart? A dialect, to put it maybe in simple terms, a dialect has to share some intelligibility with another language, and that other language has to be politically stronger, would be my definition.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. The difference in most cases is very political, because in Italy we have Sardinian, which is considered a different language. It has a different set of vowels with respect to Italian, but it's not recognized. Oh no, it is recognized as wait a second.
Yeah, Sardinian is.
Yeah, Sardinian is sorry. Sardinian is a minority language. So
yeah, but
yeah,
it's not part of the Italian language. It's not. If you speak Italian, you can't understand Sardinian.
Yeah. I would say that for Italian dialects, the reason was that when Italy was reunited again, there was this idea that unity should go through language. So it created a hierarchy between the language that was spoken as at the beginning it was a lingua franca, really, and then it became the language of the state, and the different regional languages. So yeah, it's I don't know, Ilaria, we can start a petition to have dialect recognized. Yeah, okay.
There are many people interacting.
Okay, we have 3 participants who raised a hand, but like, let's
so
go first.
There is Camille, who is talking about Singapore in the 80s, where non-Chinese dialects were banned. Right, I'm not very familiar with what happens in. I mean, it's hard to keep up with what's happening in Europe, and I'm unfortunately not very familiar. But that's definitely something that we can see on every continent, unfortunately. I think Singapore might be a great example of what happens.
Yeah.
A language had a dictionary while dialects won't have any.
Well, you can make a dictionary of a dialect if you want. There are online dictionaries of Tuscanian dialect.
A dictionary is a list of words, and dialects have words. So you can create a dictionary for dialects. Yeah, and there are dictionaries for dialects as well. Luis Anton, you have a question?
Yeah, we have some people with their hands raised. So I'll just go over Nada's comment and then we go to the real people. Yeah, she's making the case of Arabic, that of course the official one is the one that everyone understands, sort of. So the standard Arabic, and then every country has his own dialect. Yeah, Arabic is actually a very peculiar case in this respect, because we're talking about a sort of diglossia. So Arabic-speaking people do have these 2 set of languages.
You know what? Arabic makes me think of Romance languages. But for Romance, we've decided that this was French, this was Italian, and what is at the border goes either on one side or the other. Whereas for Arabic, maybe we haven't taken the time to do that, and we just think of Arabic as one language that changes from one place to the other.
Well, probably just because they maintain the standard Arabic. If we had maintained Latin, it would have been the same, probably. Anyway, so we have people with their hands raised. There are 4. Okay, first I will just go in the order of the chat. So Paul, I will unmute you.
Good, Omega. Thank you. It's a really interesting conversation, and I'll just start my my question by saying I am not a linguist. I'm just a regular person, but I'm really interested in what you're talking about. And actually, when you talk about dialects, like in Irish, we would normally think of there being 3 main dialects. You know, Munster in the south, Connemara in the middle, and Donegal, Ulster Irish. I'm from Donegal. And this point about dialects and languages and where one starts and stops, you know, Gaelic, the Scottish Gaelic, would normally be considered a different language, but there would be some words in Scots Gaelic written down that someone like me from Donegal can recognize when it's written. And actually, we would not use words that they would use in Munster Irish, even though it's still the same language as the one that we speak. So these things are very fluid, aren't they? My question, though, was about economics and economic opportunity, and in other places, what role has economics played? When I say economics, I mean the impact on people's ability to earn a living and their livelihoods and their future. What role has that played? Because certainly while the history of the Irish language is very complicated, it's definitely a fact that one of the factors amongst many was that Ireland by the 19th century had ended up quite a poor country. Now we could talk all night about why that was, and certainly a lot of people would say that was also connected to the politics and the Active Union and everything else, but that's a different discussion, as you said earlier. But definitely Ireland had ended up quite poor, and one of the things that contributed in Ireland to the decline of the language was, for example, emigration meant that people decided that their children needed to be able to speak English, because if they had to move to Liverpool or to Boston or New York, they needed to speak English to survive, to get jobs and all the rest of it, and make a new life for themselves. Now, I don't know much of the history of the areas that you're talking about, in say, for example, in Gascony or in Sud Tyrol or whatever, but has in any way economics played a role in the way that it's played in Ireland in spurring people to embrace a different language, or indeed to maintain their own language? And in a way, compared to the last speaker in Sicily, there are elements of class around this as well. And when I was my parents or grandparents would talk about Irish being described as the poor language, whereas today Irish is seen as the cool language by most people I know, and a language of the future. So sometimes economics and class are probably interrelated, but I'd be really interested to hear, what you've found in terms of, southern France and northern Italy around that.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think that's a very good example of when a language becomes a burden. So I'm not aware of, no, I would say that for France, I'm not aware of any examples like that. However, we can talk about regional accents here, and it's very well known that if you come from the south of France and you want to find a job in Paris, then you have to try to erase your accents, definitely. Otherwise, your economic situation could be impacted in some ways. And I think that we can show examples in a lot of different countries. But the language itself, I'm not aware of. What about Italy?
So, well, it's a very complex picture. So I would say that, of course, there are economic reasons in choosing one language over the other. For instance, I've known people from South Tyrol from Italian families that would enroll their children to a German-speaking schools, because in that way they would become more proficient in German, and then have opportunities in Austria and Germany, where allegedly there's more job opportunities. So that's just a very brief examples. It's not, of course, it's not related to South Tyrol itself, but there is, I would say that even if there was a dialect program, so even if in school you could choose to study your own regional dialect, and there was a trade-off between that and English, people would choose English just because it opens you more door in matters of job opportunities. So I don't know if it's more in that way. I would say that language is related to opportunities more than and employment more than economics. There's also, I'd say, not in the cases that we have tackled, but in other areas of the world, of course, language barriers go hand in hand with social inequalities. That's because if the support system is in a language that the minority cannot understand, they cannot access the welfare system. And so they are keeping aside from the state, and so they suffer social inequalities that's in as well. I don't know if it answered your question, but we have still many people who want to intervene, so I think I have to cut it short. But it was an amazing question, really. Okay, very good. I think we can go.
Yeah, other people with hands raised.
Okay, there's Georg.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much for the very interesting talk. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect, great. If I may, maybe I can also briefly connect to the two previous questions, which I also found very interesting, and then follow up with a question of my own for you guys. So first of all, for the economic thing, I think that definitely does play a role quite often. From a German perspective, there was, for example, there was a language or dialect, depending on how you look at it, in the north of Germany, Plattdeutsch, which is now almost extinct. And I recall a colleague, I'm based in Göttingen now, that was an area where at some point this was still spoken in the mid of the last century or so. But he told me that his parents actively discouraged him from even going near that. And him actually feeling embarrassed about a relative of his speaking the language at a doctor's or so, because that's kind of peasant speech. So there's that kind of aspect. The other connection to southern Italy, which came up in the earlier question, I'm working a bit on Greco, on the Greek variety spoken in Calabria. And from what, so my focus is not so much on the sociolinguistic aspect, but from what I gathered from my colleagues there, it was definitely very much also the case there that Greek was essentially the language that didn't offer them any opportunities. And also there was this large social stigma associated with speaking Greek. So a friend of mine who is one of the very few young native speakers still left told me that her grandmother was very much opposed to her father teaching her Greek because it was like a bad thing. And I mean, essentially, most people had to go elsewhere to work. So the economic part definitely plays a role. And then this Greek variety, which they didn't really even know that it was Greek, didn't offer them much in return, rather than something like German or standard Italian or whatever, where the money is essentially. And the last thing for the other question before, for Sicilian, in theoretical linguistics or in descriptive linguistics, that is recognized as a language. If you're interested, I put a link in there on Glottolog, which is a website that lists those things. So if you, that's at least maybe a little bit of recognition for you there. The question I wanted to ask pertains to the kind of practicalities, I guess, of the school system that you mentioned. I was just wondering if in Tyrol, the teaching materials, particularly, I guess, the German ones, do you know if they are produced specifically for the region, or do they kind of use stuff from Austria or Germany in order to, because I mean, I guess this is something that is not cheap to produce. Of course, it might also be an incentive for the economy on the other hand. So I was just curious how that is managed, if you know.
Well, for the Italian part, it's the same as the rest of Italy, because we have a fixed program. The textbooks itself, I am not sure. I think that a part of them are published directly, like written and published directly in South Tyrol, especially for kindergarten or the lower degrees. But I think that a lot of the material comes from Austria as well. Because as I said, the dialect itself is very similar, and I think that there's also the material would be the same. I am not too sure, to be honest. This is actually a quite interesting topic, because textbooks play a very important role in the education system as well. But yeah, I don't think there's much of a difference. It wouldn't be that different anyway, because they're pretty much standardized, like they have. So yeah. I don't. Sorry, it just reminds me that actually it's completely irrelevant to the topic, but textbooks are big issues in other countries where there's an ongoing ethnic conflict. So I'm thinking about Israel and Palestine, where textbooks, Arabic textbooks, like Arabic language textbooks, who are used in Israel, they don't come from Arabic-speaking countries, but they are produced by Israel for Israeli kids, and they do contain very strong political messages. So in that case, textbooks play a role in exacerbating the ongoing conflict. But if that's what were you going for your question, I don't think that that's the case in South Tyrol. There might be differences in the main themes, but it's not that striking. Okay, so we can move forward. Julia. No, there's another person before, maybe. Cara. Cara has had their hand raised for a while now.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I've only just started studying linguistics, but I have a question. Obviously, coming from England, there's only sort of 38% of the population that actually speak a second language, and there's sort of that mindset of why should I bother to learn another language when everyone will sort of share some of the main languages. So in terms of regional languages, which are obviously a lot smaller, if there's that mindset with the bigger languages is why should I bother learning it, then how would you change or influence the mindset for sort of maybe even the smaller regional ones?
Well, that's quite a question.
Yeah.
It's very hard to seduce people into learning a new language. I mean, it's easy, but then you have to in order for them to become proficient in that language, then it asks a lot of work. And I think the solution would be to start from birth, really.
Even if not from birth, but from very young age, like studies have shown that bilingualism from a very young age, and I'm talking kindergarten, has actually proven to be beneficial for the development of the brain itself. So it's not only a cultural enrichment, but it would be a personal and development as well. What do you think? Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably besides our scope of.
I don't know, and it's actually a question I've asked myself because, well, I've been teaching French and English in France, so French here and English in France, and I just see how hard it is to get people to learn languages, and
Yes,
especially when we look at the UK. The UK is not doing well. If you look at modern languages departments in the UK, they are in UK universities, they are just closing down. At least one every year this year's. So yeah, I wouldn't really know how to answer that question, unfortunately, and it's such a big question that I don't know. I'm sorry, that's my answer has to be so disappointing here.
Yeah. I wouldn't know what to add again. I think we have time for one last question.
Well, we have two hand raised. Maybe we can manage to do Julia and then Luis Anton.
Okay, let's try to keep the questions very brief. Julia, you can.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, hello.
Yeah.
Okay. So mine is an observation more than a question about the so-called dialects of Italian and how they actually are languages, because technically they are they are linked with official Italian, which is derived by Tuscan dialect, but technically they don't, they don't derive from that. So they're like sister languages. And so, well, this was more because I wanted to, I support totally the idea of recognizing regional languages, the so-called dialects in the Italian system, because it's a great part of our cultural diversity. And so the languages, we should be proud of that. We should not be ashamed of speaking something, a different variety of the a different language from the national variety. I'm from Tuscany, so I don't really have a dialect. My dialect is very
Sort of do.
Language. But our dialect is very similar to the official language.
Yeah, I would say that Tuscanian dialect is the only true dialect. Yeah, but but I see your point. Oh, sorry, you weren't finished?
Yeah, it's the hand is still raised.
Your hand is still raised. So yeah, totally. As I said, as we said before, in Italy's case, the difference between language and dialect is mainly political. It's it has been decided that those different languages were dialect, and they were in a hierarchically lower position than standard Italian. But from a linguistically point of view, they're languages. It's just a political choice not to have them recognized as they are in other, they might be in other countries, or as we did with Albanian, we did with Greek and Slovak and Croat. So yeah, I totally support your point, and I'm glad that the Italians in the conversation have raised that issue, because it's really important. Okay, maybe we have...
Luis Anton was the last question that we had.
Yeah, maybe we have the time for the very last question. Luis Anton?
Yeah, I'll be as quick as I can. With regards to what you were saying with France and the regional languages, in, for example, Belarus, the actual state language of Belarusian, only about 30% of the country can speak it. So a lot of people are blocked from further education if they identify as speaking those languages. Within France, say if you went to one of these bilingual schools that had the regional language, would you find further education opportunities hindered because of that association?
The issue is that bilingual schools are primary schools, and in secondary education, you find just a handful of bilingual high schools. And then this is it, and you wouldn't find any job really that would be bilingual, because there aren't, if that answers your question.
It was more just, is there a stigma for being bilingual? Like, would it affect you getting into university or college?
I don't think there is. Although, so I have connections in Gascogne, and when I talk to them about their language, their reaction is very much, why would you have interest in that? It's just the way people speak in the countryside. It's not very smart, That's the first reaction that they would have. I think that there could be. There could be some stigma from people who are not aware that, original language is a language that is precious as well. And it's time for us to say goodbye. We can maybe share our email addresses, and if you want to find us on Twitter as well, and we can say goodbye with this slide. If you want to stay in contact, or if you want to react further.
Because I saw that in the chat they were asking for books recommendation. So just if you're interested in the topics that we have discussed today, or you want some tips on further readings, just drop us an email or follows us on Twitter and just connect there.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to us and for interacting with us at the end of the presentation. And keep learning languages and fighting for regional language recognition.
Yes. Thank you so much. It has been lovely to discuss with you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.